Okay, go on.
So yeah, the creation of a collective, as what I call it, which is just kind of another word for a DAO, is definitely something that's been a primary focus of my work, and I've dog fooded it enough times to feel good about the process and offer it. And it starts with just the key to me in the future of governance is for people to be familiar and empowered in the process of creating their own agreements as to how to govern and iterating those agreements anytime necessary, and creating it. And so of course my work from the software perspective is creating the framework to make it easy for people to do that. And we do have some tools on the way within the next few months, I hope. I'm super excited about that, but for right now we get to just kind of do it on paper. And yeah, it looks definitely like aligning on a mission and a vision is one of the first steps for sure. So because what are we doing together, right? What brings us together is one of the most critical things to understand and agree upon. And then directly after that is kind of relating to any assets. And because what is a group doing if you're not actually stewarding something real in the world together, then what are you doing? You're talking, you're hanging out and talking, which is great. Good morning. I like talking too and sharing ideas, but if we actually wanted to be a group that's like, so in theory, getting something done together, usually that means stewarding a shared asset. And so that's critical to really lighting the fire under our butts and putting us, because we can all get along easy when we're just talking, but when we all put $1,000 in or something like that, then we have something to steward together, an asset to steward together. Mm-hmm. And then it gets real. And starting with a nice small amount before is always the more assets a group is stewarding, the more tension that can potentially arise. And I've been in I don't know, I'm sure we've all had experience with some group that is getting along just fine until money gets involved, and all of a sudden it gets all weird. So we get to step through that phase and look at what we're stewarding, and then identify how we make decisions, right? So we get to invent that. And of course, I'm sure there's tons of knowledge on here about all these advanced ways to make decisions and software tools ultimately available. But the key is for us all to create that together and have a really grounded feeling of completely understanding the process. And, I remember the first time I joined a computer club when I was a kid, and they used the standard, group process of minutes and a secretary and somebody leading the meeting. And it was just all very foreign and disempowering. Dude, I didn't know what I was supposed to do or what the procedures were to have a voice. And so the object with a group like this is that we get to create that process together. So even if we do come up with something that's been widely used or that is standard, or we all feel very empowered in the decision of choosing that, right? And so this is just some of the first steps that I could walk us through and get all that in writing in a way that is compatible with recording it, recording the information about how we will operate in a standard way. Like the proposals that I'm making about CoGov are the standard way of recording these things on a ledger, so that other groups that are doing the same process, you can look at their ledger and go, oh, that's how they're doing that. And it all kind of makes sense. And there's a lot more I could say, but I'll leave it at that for now. Good morning, all the people that came on. I'm going to try to listen more now.
Ali, who are you?
Thank you, Raymond.
Hi, Lauren. Olivier is a friend of mine, and he's into all kinds of interesting projects. So I just told him he might be interested to come and check out and see what's here. But his wife is leaving soon to go on a trip, so he probably won't be here for very long.
Okay. Yes. Well, welcome.
So wait a minute, guys. I have a problem with my sound, so that's not fun.
I can hear you. Hello, Dave, in the sun.
Yeah, just in a very pink cafe.
Well, it looks warm.
Pink. Trying to see. Yeah, it's unusual. Yeah, there, I've got you all. I'm on my mobile because I wasn't sure when the call was going to be, so I just decided to leave my dark and dingy den of vice and come and convene with pink nature. Cheers to you all from sunny London.
Unbelievable. Did you want me to give a little introduction of Olivier for you? It's
yeah,
besides,
sure.
Besides the fact I pronounced his name wrong, would you like to say your name? Bellevant? Is it Bellevant Olivier?
Sounds good to me.
Okay, and he's involved. We're building a project. He's heading it up where he is going to the local high school with the chemistry teacher and hooking up with the 17 SDGs and the local volunteering. So we're working on this matchmaker program that is building. It's his vision, and I'm kind of helping him with that. But it's a very interesting connective project for connecting children to the world of need. So I can let him explain that better, but that's essentially where we are.
I feel like I've been hacking the event here, which is not good.
No, go on.
Sorry?
Go on.
Yeah, so thank you for Colin for bringing me in, but yeah, I don't even know what the agenda of your meeting, but basically, yeah, I'm originally from Brittany in France. I've been working and living in Africa, Asia, and Latin America. At one point, I became a stay-at-home dad. My life went upside down, and I started to serve my community and arrived in Princeton 3 years ago. I've been in America for 13 years. I've been building community online, think tank around people from my region who are living in Africa, Asia, and Latin America. And I built up a nonprofit in New York City around people of my region. So I'm fascinated about this notion of why do we want to be more and more local, and why do we want to be more and more global? How are we going to handle that? And where is the value creation happening? How do we share value with each other? And yeah, so here now I want to be very, very local. I want to connect the diversity of origin and languages with the diversity of knowledges to tackle the local challenges that we have. So the framework I'm going to have is going to be, everybody will look for his own Ikigai and align his Ikigai with the 17 goal of the UN. And the idea is to scratch the 3,000 nonprofit that there is in New Jersey to put them into the 17 goal of the UN, of the SDG. So I'm happy because now I'm getting out of this online world. I'm going back to the roots of I'm going my boots dirty on the ground, and that's what I want.
Yeah, and he's definitely crosses over with many other projects in his mission. One of the things is about the multiple languages. I find indigenous languages and is a big topic, and he's all about that, connecting people back to their roots. Basically, getting people to build their quest and be involved with that. How you doing, Sam? So. I don't know how to introduce anymore, but just to say that he's very wide, and he's about people living intentional purpose in what they're doing and supporting that. And specifically, the project now that we're working on is around the 17 SDGs and hooking up the high school to the Princeton University and in that synergy to support the local volunteer projects that might need to be, and there's a big local aspect to it. So anyway, very, very interesting stuff.
Yeah, there's also this notion, I understand, especially in America, you start to have time for yourself when you over 55, and so there is a kind of this notion of giving back to your community is strong. But yeah, I would love to connect the under 25 and the over 55. And the other ones are like in a rat race, and they don't really fully grasp. They are part of the system. I mean, I'm not saying that it's for everybody like that, but perhaps for 75% of the people, it's complicated.
Okay. And I just wanted to introduce David. Are you there? David? You there? Okay, well, anyway, so David, I met him on a call with Christina Rowland, and he's really a mastermind. He does everything from legal stuff to theater productions and programming, and just likes to really put stuff together. And he's raring to go. Very interesting guy. And Colin is very interested in putting together actual practical knowledge ecology products, like his knowledge trails. That would actually make all of these video calls so much easier. I wish that we already had his products today, but I think I have to bootstrap them. So in this call today, I wanted to talk about governance and how to set up a governance document. And the problem is I've kind of gathered these people together kind of in spiral way, as in I've really picked people that I thought were incredible, that I think would be amazing working together. So it's less of like I have a particular mountain that I'd like to climb, and more that, hey, Charles, and more that I think these are incredible people, and everyone, there's a lot of alignment between the people. What, I don't know how to explain this. It's like, so there's not a particular mountain that I feel like we need to climb, but I was explaining in the chat that I'm really more interested in the base camp and how we basically supply people who want to climb mountains with the right equipment, so they are safe and don't die.
There you go. So that sounds like, Lauren, like you have the beginning sentence or two of a vision and a mission statement, and you know, one way to collaborate on that is to get everybody together to just start throwing stuff out. But this seems like a fairly big and diverse group that we might try other processes. Maybe you could do that more one-on-one with everybody, being that you're kind of the center. Everybody's revolving around your magnetic attraction here. Thank you so much. And you know, maybe that's something you can do. You could take a shot at some initial statements of a mission and vision. In my mind, a vision looks just like that. Like, what would the world look like, right? At some point from the work we do, and the mission is a little more specific in exactly what we do. And you can maybe take a shot at that and kind of work one-on-one with people for a while to fine-tune it, and then you know, maybe you could even do that this week, and then by the time we come together in a week, we kind of all had some preliminary back and forth with you about it, and maybe we're pretty close.
So Raymond, this is Sam. As you were summarizing your experience and your approach, I was kind of asking in the back of my mind, how would that apply to an organization that is quite distributed, where we're trying to do, I guess, I don't like this term, but I guess most people understand it, more peer-to-peer, more collegial, more single class of members style. And the reason I ask that is, in communities like this, where sometimes we see alignment, sometimes we see membership, you know, ebb and flow, sometimes we see people come and go, the specific membership of certain of these communities may not be quite as well defined as certain others. And in these communities, you know, we still want to make decisions, we still want to take action, we still want to manage assets. we still want to manage liabilities. And so I'm curious about that particular model. And my particular reference frame for this is how the internet evolved through a very, very wide community of people who you don't necessarily know who's in and who's out. But you do see that protocols get standardized. You do see that decisions get made, apps get written, interoperation works. So I'm very, very curious about that particular model. Not quite so assumed and taken for granted. Over.
Yeah, I don't know. I know you were addressing me, and I didn't necessarily hear a particular question, but I'm my assumption is that we're all coming from a single, class of person, right? That we're all individual, equally empowered peers as we start the process. And then, but within what we're actually designing is the process by which it might start looking like taking shape, of where different classes might form or different particular specialties might arise, different levels of influence and particular types of decisions would arise. We're going to create the framework, is my suggestion, under which we evolve that together from a single class into a more diverse and organizational structure that starts to make some sense for getting things done in the world.
Just a quick follow-up on that one is, and I think it's actually appropriate in this particular case, that Lauren has acted like a hub. She has, as you say, magnetically attracted each of us to come to this particular discussion. So she actually has a role already. So the question is, does that scale? And is that something that we want to assume or explicitly adopt? Let me say one more thing, and that is that the model that's in the back of my mind has been kicking there for several months is an RFC-based model. It's a propose and gather feedback and wait till feedback sort of subsides in a long tail model, which allowed the internet to take shape and allowed apps to become developed and allow thousands of protocols actually to become standardized. Not written in stone, but at least they work. So I am curious because I think that to me is a genesis of a decision-making model, which could be the start of a governance model. And so that's the one that I'm experimenting with in my own head. And that's the one that I'm going to be writing about in the next 12 hours or so. And I'm inviting conversation about that because I think it's a model that does scale and it does seem to work. And I'm curious about other people's reactions to those models, particularly in the way that the internet was able to scale and whether or not those apply to what we're talking about today. Over.
Yeah, that sounds like an interesting line of inquiry, and sounds attractive to me as well in terms of what a group like this could look like in collaboration. So the suggestion I would have is to get clear on what our process is around how to submit an RFC and how to have the comments come in and all of those things. That's the preliminary work we would get to do if indeed that was the model we wanted to adopt. But at some point you want to get clear on what is the process to adopt something, right? So it's, for a while we can just have fun and just say, oh, it seems like everybody agrees with that. Okay, cool, moving along then. But at some point, especially when assets get involved, you want to have a definite clarity that yes, something was officially adopted.
Josh, I know you have your hand up, but this is the one distinction I find that's very key, is that I'm not actually sure.
Let Charles talk. He's had his hand up for like 10 minutes. Charles.
I don't see Charles, unfortunately.
Did he go?
Hi. No, sorry, I'm here. I was just going to type in the chat. If you can hear me, it's good. I'm on a train, but for another 5 minutes. My connection's a little choppy. So just, hi everyone. I'm glad to be here, and I'm coming in a bit out of context. So Sam, just something jumped out a bit from what you said, kind of at the beginning of your statement just before, in terms of Lauren and attracting us as functioning as a hub, and the question about does that scale? So I was just, it's kind of an interesting frame that I heard in there. Maybe I'm reading into it a little too much. The question maybe is, does Lauren scale as a hub? But the other thing, and again, I don't know what was discussed from the top of today's call in terms of the purpose. We're talking a lot about protocols and processes, which is great, and I'm excited to hear this dialogue moving forward. But for me, I haven't heard a particular focus or purpose defined or even sketched out, and to me that seems like a basis before we get to kind of decision making around that, unless it's about decision making around what's the purpose. So that's me. Check.
Yes, the infinite paradox. That's it. So yeah, so we're in the nebulous area where we have to define a vision and also define the way we all agree that we have adopted that vision, right? And then from that very basic framework, then things start to look more clear going forward.
But let me just jump back in and just put it a little more squarely to Lauren. I mean, maybe I'm misinterpreting Sam, and if so, apologies. But Lauren, do you scale as a hub?
No, and I do not want to be the hub. I would like to, as soon as possible, remove myself from the center here. Yeah, Joshua.
Yeah, I've been thinking a lot about this since our last 4 calls, and this is sort of a hybrid of all the different people, from Chris Cook to Sam to Raymond to Charles to sort of what everyone is talking about is how do you put the puzzle pieces together, and then how do you own the assets? So if it's okay, I'd like to propose an idea of connecting everyone together without you being the hub, and then also making sure we have stewarded assets like Raymond Powell's talking about. And the idea is to have one person wanting to do one thing that they're really, really good at doing, but it'd be nice if they had help. So they can pick someone in our group or outside of our group as a mentee, and they are the mentor to do that thing. And that could be a request for proposal. It could be a creation of software. It could be just to draw up an idea that's clear to present to the group. That's not a formal proposal, but a working group of 2. And then at that point, if that attracts magnetically a second person, they have 2 mentees. So the mentor has 2 mentees, and then flip it around where there's something else after that is completed. If it does get completed, then it becomes an asset and something that the group can steward further. If it does not get completed, the chain breaks and the process starts over again. Is that clear?
Sounds cool. So,
yeah.
If it's clear, I think I need to see it laid out, but it sounded good.
Yeah, I want to go ahead and add artificial intelligence to a website, but I need help to do that. So I would ask the group, does anyone want to work with me to add an artificial intelligent plugin, bot, usable, actionable item to a website? Once that is created, then the assets of that are owned by me and my 1 mentor or my 2 mentees, excuse me. And if I get stuck, I need someone above me, so I become the mentee, and the person above me has to tell me who else I'm working with. So we're essentially going from 1 to 2 to 3. And that 3 will turn into 5. And there's 2 things that get done with that. Those 2 things get completed. Then part of the process of above, after the thing is completed, is to license it to the group itself that created it, and then share that license with a Creative Commons open source type of license with the whole so it can scale. So one thing is to create the thing that you want to do. Number 2 is to license it so that everyone who worked on it has fair and equal value for the time that they put in. And it's not just one person saying how much time they put in, it's 3 people saying how much time was put in to make sure that it's even. And then that gets licensed in a Creative Commons attribution way. So the group can use that, or maybe they say they don't want to share it with the group. I mean, we could be selfish. It's okay. If it's like, hey, we created something so amazing, we're going to go start a company now, but we want to hire everyone in the group. Or, you know what, we got to give this to the world for free. So that's an idea that I have I'm just proposing. Charles, please.
Josh, that was much clearer, and I appreciate that. It just occurs to me, because you're sort of numbering these steps, that actually the crucial thing, which is not negligible, is sort of maybe 0.5 is establishing the system to kind of get this mentor-mentee setup going. But actually the selection, the specific selection per project, let's call it, would be step 1, I think. Maybe just to renumber. It's just my 2 cents. Because that's not negligible, that selection process, necessarily.
Well, I'll go one step further and say that
please,
what
Colin.
we need first is the process by which we can take that idea, that proposal, and say, is that something we want to take on as a group to fine-tune and adopt ultimately?
So meta.
Getting clarity on the decision-making process for how we would do that.
Yeah, and I think for clarity's sake is we're not asking the group, we're just trying to find one mentee, one person that believes in it, that wants to do it, but doesn't have the expertise to do it. So the person that's proposing the project needs to have the expertise to actually accomplish the project, otherwise it'll never get done. But if you're looking for the whole group to adopt it, it's very difficult. But just one person to believe in that project and want to learn is a lot easier.
Right.
Does that make sense?
What I was going to is I was abstracting. So to adopt the agreement that we would actually engage in that process together, right? So that we would have a framework by which somebody would say, "Hey, I need help with this," and that they could receive that help, and that the processes, the steps by which that happened, were in writing and part of our governance and operations document, right? So that's what I was suggesting.
Yeah, and here I'm trying to get away from that. I just want to be really clear. That's where everything gets stuck and sticky, is that exact agreement, micro agreement document that everybody agrees on. I want to make it so that only one person, 2 people have to agree on that, not everybody. It's separate. So if those 2 people make that agreement, then they can accomplish that project or not.
Sam?
So Josh, the execution of what you're talking about right now, I think is entirely enabled and entirely empowered. I don't see any block there. The issue that I have a question about, and this is where perhaps Tiberius has it, is how do we assess value? Because to me, any time-based accounting of value is incomplete without looking at derivation or provenance or impact, So in other words, if I have 1,000 hours put someplace else, I spend 5 minutes here introducing that notion. What is the value? I mean, to me, unless we answer these questions, then these licensing questions and these value assessment and these redistribution questions, to me, I don't understand. And I'll go even further. For any coin-based, cryptocurrency-based value propagation network, if the people who start that network end up winning in that network, then to me, it's an incomplete network. If it doesn't recognize the value that already exists in the world and figures out a way for that to become value in the currency value propagation network. And I know that's a very important statement, but that
no. Can I chip in? If I could chip in there.
Go ahead, David.
So, I mean, to me, I agree with everything that everyone's saying. But if I was to be rude, I would say every individual point is completely obvious. So it's very obvious that a very simple technique where a few people verbally can come together and just make an acknowledgement and then undertake practical action. I'll stay outside before I go on the tube here, is very agile, very pragmatic, quite human-centered, and has lots of advantages. It's also very obvious it has lots of disadvantages. It's very obvious that if you just assess quality by time-based input, you're not going to capture other forms of value, of expertise, of morality, of all sorts of things. And all we're doing when we come up with these simple step chunk solutions and propose them in a group situation is we're acknowledging to each other that governance is a many millennium sophisticated structure which has evolved with spirituality in it, with political battles, with politics, with voting, with currencies, and that there is no way that any simple thing that we come up with, which just say, let's propose this set of rules, and that's going to kind of do all of value or all of governance, or even a half-hearted attempt at governance. What we will inevitably end up with is something which is very rich and very very complex to describe in words of like, this is simply it. And that gives us a problem when we are marketing a new form of governance to groups that aren't spending like 20 years of their life thinking about it, because you know, it's quite abstract and it's quite difficult. So it's a huge advantage to just be able to capture it in very simple Trumpian sound bites, right? Then that's a good marketing tactic. But it's a terrible governance policy you end up with that way. It might work for certain groups in certain contexts for a very small period of time. But what I think we're all saying when we're chipping in a Zoom conversation or any form of chat flow of things is we're all particularly maybe on Sam saying the RFC model from the 70s for the internet is a really interesting thing. And it certainly was a really interesting thing. And it has certainly done many, many things. But whether that is going to capture, for instance, empathy for homeless people is a completely different question, right? And each of us are putting in these small pieces. And I think a starting point for me is we need to acknowledge the complexity and the beauty of the governance structure that we will need to evolve, and that we have a very pragmatic approach of saying let's get a, you know, I think it's a sort of Josh type technique of who's interested in this particular aspect, okay, go and make that real, implement it in procedures, in law, in code, or in social practice, and come back. And who are interested in this, and we know we're going to have to put several of these together, and also really acknowledge the long history of experimentation in the space. And don't just, we've got to do something completely new, but we've got to look at you know, all the different sorts of online governance procedures, and a lot of, I mean, and failures from, I don't know if people know, what's an example, Better Means, for instance. Great, interesting project. I don't know if people know about it, but a complete failure in terms of adoption and complexity and acceptability. Liquid Democracy, another great project. Again, a failure in terms of adoption, and so forth. And then Occupy practices, great human-centered values, but a failure in terms of other aspects as well. So we've got to really study the failures of the past and appreciate the scope of what we're doing, and then view the teamwork that we need to implement to tackle that scope of delivery very seriously. It's like we cannot do it unless we operate very pragmatically, and there's a lot of concrete work that needs to be done, and there's no simple solution to it. We have to spend many man years of work, and we've just got to bootstrap towards that. I think that's what, well, I don't know, that's too long, too many words, but what I'm frustrated by, I guess, when I overhear conversations is that a lot of people are proposing good ideas, and I go, yeah, great, yeah, of course, yeah, great, of course, yeah, and then you've got like 15 of these on the table, and there's still no step forwards. And I think I can't remember the gentleman or the lady who proposed the fact that you right at the beginning need to adopt some very simple, and I just go by standard legal, as flexible as possible decision-making practices, so that you avoid two classic things of groups like this: tyranny of structurelessness and an inability to ever make any decision and just go around in circles constantly. So if we have to build lots of these small things, we need to adopt an initial machinery which has two properties. One, it's able to evolve and change fast enough to have a realistic capability of delivering innovative governance. So we can't adopt a rigid one, because then we'll end up with rigid governance. You know, you've got to have something that's got change rules and changeability in it. And secondly, you've got to, right at the beginning, tackle the pragmatic steps: budget, bank account, decision making. But okay, that's how minimal stuff. Let's get going.
Yeah,
Joshua?
real quick, I just want to say, yeah, before, I never said, Sam, that the value would be based on time. I never said that. So that was an assumption. And I want to be very clear, the value is based on the third triad. If one person has something, a valuable idea, it's the execution of it that turns it into an asset. If it can't be executed, if no one will join that idea, it dies there with the one person. But if the one person knows how to execute that idea, but has another person that can be taught how to execute that idea, then the value is in the mentor-mentee, because just by teaching one person, that is creating value. So if that other person knows how to execute that and they want to go off and do it on their own way, there's no rules, no governance. At that point, if they don't want to make an agreement, but they want to learn from the other person and just take their knowledge and go use it, if the mentor is, and I'm using the words mentor and mentee because to me, that's the way I understand it, is you're mentoring someone not because you want to own them or because you want them as an employee. You're mentoring them to share that knowledge. And right there is the value. And once that knowledge is shared between the two, if those two people can propose it, where the third triad stands it up by the third person coming on to the team to be the second mentee, that third person is going to have to assess the value, because there's going to be a lot more than just one third person, if that makes sense. There's going to be many people that want to come in, and therefore that pull, that magnetic energy, that understanding of that attraction is the value itself. So the three of them have to make a micro agreement of the value of the project at that point, and what can that third person bring to the project that's going to create even more value. And it's up to those two people to decide who that third person is. And therefore the value is part of the knowledge of assessing what is that thing worth at this point that it's attracting a third triad. Does that make sense? I'm spitballing here at the same time. I would like to execute it if it works.
Can I say something on that? Just reply?
Sure.
Or okay, so my question is, are you talking there, describing basically what other people have referred to or practiced in terms of a duocracy? Do you know what a duocracy is? Is that a familiar term?
I don't give a shit about all this governance and ocracies. I'm trying to get away from it. I'm sorry, David. I'm going to be
it's not a technical thing. It's just like
I'm going to be honest.
Slang.
Like, theoretically, I don't care if those two people work together well, and you want to call it a love relationship.
I agree with you. I don't care. We don't care what it's called, right?
If it works, it works. The bottom line: if it works, it works. If it doesn't work, it dies. It's just I just want to keep it simple, not fit into ocracies. But please explain a duocracy if you'd like.
It's not a theoretical thing, it's a pragmatic thing. It's just like there have been, I don't know, I've been in probably 3 or 4 groups, I don't know, spent maybe about 6 years or 6 to 8 years of my life in these different groups that practice what you're describing there, which is small groups, anyone can propose an issue, as long as there's a seconder or a third or a group round, they go off and they've got the kind of the mandate from the overall people to take something forwards, and then they come back to the group and they show what they've done. It's also very inspired by open source philosophy as well, and just all the you know, when people were trying to describe what that technique of governance was, a bunch of people I know, and you know, it's not an academic thing, just said, yeah, that's what we're into. It's a do-ocracy. It's not about talking, it's about doing. If you get down and do it, and you come back, and you've added a nice bit to that, which is this kind of mentorship, which is like the peer-to-peer learning. And there are huge advantages to what you're talking about. It's human-centered. It relies on the individual. They can capture the value from around them. It cuts out lots of philosophical talk and architectural bollocks and XML file structures and what have you, and just says, show me the working code, show me the change in the community you're talking about, and then we'll respond to that. And it's great, but it's got real disadvantages, right, in practice, right? So, for instance, it's a very practiced techniques by fascist organizations. It encourages bullying quite a lot over a period of time, right? What tends to happen is people who are maybe quite administrative and organizational and do a lot and are very sort of organized, right? They tend up dominating the communities. And some shy people who come along, some people from excluded minorities come along, and they're not quite sure. They suggest something, and they're immediately told to go out and do it, and they don't necessarily have the confidence and what have you. And it has encouraged quite a lot of bullying in the sort of communities that I've seen who adopt it in a hardcore sense. And if you look at it, if you applied it, I don't know, to the history of the United States or something like that, you can see that it could be picked up as a technique in like the civil rights era by various communities who have the courts and the states and the state machinery, and they go out and do lots of stuff, but they're implementing racist policies. They're implementing policies that go against some principles and values which you can't quantify by the value judgment criteria that you're talking about, which is if you're into it and you do it and you come back to us, the amount of doing is all the value that counts here. So it's a very strong human-centered technique, very pragmatic, very agile, but it's also very easy to co-opt to dark forces as well.
Awesome. Let's go to the dark force.
Tiberius, I'd actually really like to hear from you, Tibi.
Can I say something?
Yeah, who said that?
Oh, yeah, that's Ollie. I'm sorry, I didn't hear anything.
Okay.
Yeah, I'm the fact that I've been kind of observing and serving my community in different nonprofit. In the nonprofit world is pretty interesting to see how people kind of reinvent themselves and are empowered to really go deep down in what they were supposed to do before they enter into the workforce. And what I'm trying to do right now is really empower high schoolers to find mentors in the community. That's more the people who are serving the community, and all the nonprofit, and all we're trying to answer all the challenges that the community has. And you know, at the heart of it, it's a lot of to do with listening to the students' needs, and of willing to embrace their vision and their young vision. And so I understand this notion of mentor and mentees, and I'm very intrigued and of this new talk for me, really, about how do you get a project with people that wants to resolve problems together. But clearly, I see that in French we have a word called bienveillance, which is like the kindness. Kindness should be at the center of wanting to work together, and I think it's very difficult to quantify the level of kindness and caring that there is around the projects to be resolved. Anyway, just wanted to share that.
Okay, Tiberius. TV? You have to unmute yourself.
Yes. Yeah. So, yeah, I'm listening here and try to relate our experiences with Centorica. For us, governance is something that emerges in context. as a response to organizational problems. And it is not to be considered alone. It's just one dimension of organizations as beings. Um, so, so you have methodologies, you have IT infrastructures, you have culture, and you have governance. And there are some patterns when you talk about governance: bureaucracy, meritocracy, democracy, fluid democracy, and so on and so forth. But these are just patterns, and I think, in my opinion, we should never go for one of these patterns, and we should just look at the organization in the context, in its complexity, and ask ourselves, what do we want to achieve as a group, and how do we function, and what kind of rules and decision-making processes we can give ourselves in order to function better. And that might end up to be a mix of these patterns. Meaning, in some instances, you might want to function in a very meritocratic way. In others, you might want to allow people that do to do their best and give them a lot of leeway, a lot of freedom. And in some contexts, you want a democracy. You want one man, one vote, one woman, one vote. So, governance is not something that you decide beforehand, detached from the reality of your organization. It's something that evolves, actually. And yes, you can start with a template, but not based on just to save time and add some structure from the beginning. If you want to go fast, you can start with some template, but not based on one of these patterns of governance, but based on some other organization's experience that you think is close to yours. In our case, when we started Tutorica, we said no rules, no structure at the beginning, because we didn't know how this organization would look like. But what we knew was that we want to scale peer production of material stuff. Okay, so how do you work in a physical lab and work on material products in a peer-to-peer way? And we said we only put structure in place as we encounter problems. And then every problem that we encountered, we asked ourselves, is this because we're lacking some rules? Is this because we need some tools? Is this because our methodology was not good? Or maybe we don't have the proper culture? And we worked on all these 4 layers at the same time. And sometimes the disagreement is because you don't have proper tools, let's say, to document or to communicate or whatever. In some cases, the way you went to do it, the methodology was wrong. And then you end up into problems, and now people are jumping at each other and having fights. So we worked on these 4 layers at the same time. And it turns out that they all interact with each other. For example, you have a rule in your organization to create an organizational memory. Well, you need to save. You need to save data. You need to save information. Therefore, you need some tools. You need to share a database. And there might be some other conditions that database should be, accessible by anyone or by just some people in the organization or whatever. But you can't enforce a rule of creating an organizational memory if you don't give yourself the tools. Same thing for the procedures or for the methodology of work. If you want to create organizational memory, well, you have to include in your methodology documentation. If documentation is not part of the methodology, you might have the rule, you might have the tools to dump some data and information somewhere, but nobody's doing it because it's not part of the script. So for us, governance is something very complex. And when we talk about organizations, we talk about living systems, living organisms, and you can't just come up with a governance before you go through living the organization. Yeah, that's it. I think I said it.
Phalan, do you want to say something?
No, I was listening to what he was saying, and I was thinking that makes a lot of sense. But I think sometimes too, whether the tools are accessible, people know how to connect their own gifts and abilities to the context. You know, I think that speaking on Josh's point, like a mentoring kind of situation where you might want to contribute, but you might not understand exactly how the talents you have or the insights you have could contribute to it, you know, so.
David?
Yeah, I really, and I have to confess to the group that I'm in a bad mood this morning. So if I'm sounding critical, I'm just going to release my inner demons on the innocent members of this friendly gathering. So I really liked what, I don't know how to pronounce it, TB said. It was super experienced, deep, profound, and reasonable. And as such has a major shortcoming. So if the scenario is one, let's say, that we're addressing, in which as long as we are wise and we work together well and we look at all aspects of the human and we borrow from experience and tradition of other groups, we will achieve our goals, then it's the perfect strategy. Okay, but if there is a fundamental problem in a modern technological world with our understanding of governance and our set of toolkits that we have at our disposal, then that form of relating to people, evolving, and dealing with everything in a communal and a convivial way of doing things is unlikely to be sufficiently kind of critically radical of governance structures to come up with the sort of solution that might really address the world's problems of climate change and other forms of collective governance, because it's deeply conservative in its conviviality, right? So it's sometimes that's why a lot of inventions or creations are created by these pig-headed, difficult, awkward people, right? And if you don't have space for that in the project that you're doing, and not only space, but actually skew the project slightly to favor those individuals, you're very unlikely to give birth to the new forms of governance that the world might need.
That sounds so top down, though. And I thought the whole point was, if you're trying to have a paradigm shift never happens from the top down. Like, okay, well, we can't wait until everybody can find themselves on one accord or become inculcated with the process. It's just a question of like, let's just do the process and we'll just fit you in later on. I think that's antithetical to the hypothesis. Well, at least the thesis you offered early on.
It's a good point, but it's certainly not what is. You could read into a proposed solution to the problem. You know, the problem being that a convivial form of governance is not likely to come up with something radically different from what most other people have done in history, if you like, and say, well, then you're talking about like some kind of centralized fascist solution to it. that's not usually the case. It's more the case is, how do you pick up like some oddball, diverse individual, like, I don't know, in physics it would be Einstein, or in some history of spirituality it would be a really minority figure, unpopular in history, unpopular in the social convivial context. Richard Stallman in open source might be an example, or something like this. And how do you ensure that your governance doesn't just smother out these fringe, rare voices? So in effect, it's like it's a critique of the American Democratic Party. How do you get Bernie Sanders-like characters to have a voice and not smother them out? So in a sense, it's the opposite of centralized control of sensible conversation. And it's more like saying, how can we have this diversity of voices? And how can we actually invest in some of these extreme voices in order to promote the sort of, we recognize the mainstream isn't working and we need something here. So we need an architecture which promotes this rare, fragile diversity at the fringes. So it's the opposite of centralized dictatorial governance, but it is a structure that the whole community adopts.
I think Ali was right in the sense that niceness and kindness and wanting to actually commit to it is really the only way to dictate people being drawn towards that agency.
And you haven't met Richard Stallman.
I would like to say that I think it's really hard to come up with a governing document in the abstract. And I'm wondering if, so the idea is to, as a group, say, where do we want to go as a group? But I'm actually a lot less concerned about that. And what I would like to do is create the environment where each person could get really clear and we're able to communicate to the others how we would advance ourselves and feel more comfortable and more secure and feel like we're getting someplace and accomplish the projects that we want to accomplish and help each other do those things that we want to do. So I'm more concerned with creating an environment where we can all flourish and less concerned with a specific like, what do we have to do together as a group and how can it scale? More concerned with how can we just, less of can it scale? And as always, how can we just work together well now? What can we do in the next few weeks that would advance ourselves? And to concentrate more on like bringing in money in the short term and supporting ourselves and stuff like that.
Yeah, can I talk about this notion that is in my mind since I became a guy who served his little nucleus of family? For me, family need to be at the center of it all. Because how do I explain that? When you start a family, if you have a chance to have been starting a family, or if you're part of a family, we kind of like try to get along together and help each other up along the way. Now, we just need to extend the way we see ourselves in the family. And so here's a little point that I discover is that this notion of diversity, I think, is not really understood by enough people, I think. Our diversity of knowledge, the knowledge is more important than knowledge. That's the value of a knowledge is very confusing to many people, I feel. I'm just trying to not be too philosophical, but more specific. I'm trying right now to connect the diversity of origin and languages that there is in a community with the diversity of knowledges that exist in diversity, to tackle local problems. I'm trying to be very specific in connecting our diversity to the local problems that we have. And now the governance of things that need to happen there need to happen because we're going to identify the people that are connecting this diversity with one another in order to tackle the true problems that we have locally. And right now, I think there is a disconnect between the problems that there is in a community with the diversity that exists in the community. So I think the web right now needs to become a local web. I don't know where you are in the world, and it's very important what we're doing. It's from time to time to become like global and online, but I think we also need to concentrate on be very local. And just think about the fact that your neighbor that you have are probably as important than your family, than your own family, like if I may say, because they are your neighbor. They are part of your network to make a living, a sustainable living with one another. And I think we are, I don't think we are really fully grasping this aspect of things. But anyway, perhaps it's too philosophical what I say. Right now I have a university called University of Princeton, and I have a high school called the High School of Princeton. And I want to work with these guys locally. And I want to define locally how we're going to tackle our local problems. But if we have identified the diversity of languages that exist around, perhaps we can go from a local one to a global one. But before that, I think it's going to be complicated. So I decided that my neighbors are my family. And it took me a long time. It took me 20 years between Africa, Asia, and Latin America to realize that my neighbors are my family. Anyway.
Chris, I'd love to hear from you on kind of starting a club. What do we need to know? Unmute yourself, Chris. Chris, we can't hear you.
Chris,
we haven't heard you. Here, I'll unmute him. There we go. I unmuted you, Chris. We didn't hear you.
All right. Okay. Thanks very much. Yeah, I'm just sitting here in northern Glasgow, looking out over Glasgow. I've just been to a housing cooperative meeting, fully mutual, Scotland's biggest. Quite inspiring what these guys have done. Maybe I can actually turn it around and you can actually see some of it. If I knew how to work the bloody thing, I would. No, well, never mind. Anyway, suffice to say that what I've been talking here about is the idea of having a sort of next generation cooperative. The idea of a cooperative as an agreement, as distinct from a cooperative as an organization. And the interesting thing about this group is, and David was touching upon this in what he was just talking about. I mean, David's like me. He's unmanageable. You can't employ David and you can't employ me. We're just unmanageable. And I think probably that is the common thread through a lot of this group. And we are essentially, we're a herd of cats that hasn't yet found a way of being herded, and I think if we can come up with an agreement, and I mean an agreement, not an organisation. We've got enough organisations as it is. If we can come up with an agreement within which we can say, okay, this is what we're going to do. These are our aims, values, and we've got to keep it pretty high level. And yeah, we're going to change the world, but we need to do it step by step on certain maybe prototypes in certain spaces. And and David, I remember, he came out with a cracker once. I'd worked on a project for 3 years, 2.5 years, and it all went pear-shaped because of it was a property project, and the local politicians killed it. So I'm there with David at where we live, sort of crying into my beer almost. And David said, Chris, why don't you deal with Drosophila? I said, Drosophila, David, what's Drosophila? He said, fruit flies. I said, what the hell are you talking about? He says, you know, you're dealing with elephants at the minute. I said, David, what the fuck are you talking about? And he basically said, Chris, he said, elephants are pregnant for 2 years and fruit flies for 2 days. What you need to do is test your ideas on something much more short life. And that's what I then did by basically getting a film funded, et cetera, et cetera. But the principles and the structures which I have used and tested do work in practice, but some things take much longer than others to actually achieve. So it's the idea of getting away from, and for me, the key point, which I think is fundamental, it's this concept of a legal person, right? This fiction of a legal person, which came along 1,000 years ago, probably, but has become completely out of control. Like a state is a legal person, and it comes between you and me, and it alienates me, and it alienates you. And a PLC is a legal person, and it comes between me, and it comes between you, and it screws both of us. And then NGOs, all of these legal persons are organizations. I believe what's needed is to reimagine the company as what it was in the beginning, of people who took bread together, an association of people to a common purpose, but does not have a legal existence independent of the people in it, right? That is my conception, if you will, of an open company. I called it an open corporate 20 years ago, but that's a contradiction in terms, so let's call it an open company. A company of friends, a company of people on a journey. And I think it's possible, we're using this expression I call non-dominium, which basically means nobody tells anybody what to do, but you can build certain veto rights in there as to what will not be done. I think that that is the way we can herd the cats present on this phone call and otherwise. And that is the way, if we can herd the cats, we can basically, if we can manage you lot, we can manage anything. All right? So that's my speech.
So Chris, how do we start? How do we start? We're totally with you. How do we start this? Tell us.
Well, God, you make me sound like Buddha or something, you know. We draft something, an agreement between us. You know, one of us, I could maybe just write a very, very early draft, just a 2-pager. And then we can say, okay, let's get to work on this and then maybe expand it. But, you know, the thing about club rules is they're by definition simple because you are not in an adversarial relationship, you know? They say there are as many sumo wrestlers in the US as there are lawyers in Japan, right? And that is because in Japan, trust is assumed. And in the US, I guess trust is not, and you have adversarial relationships. And I think if we can come up with agreements to a common purpose, they will be simple and they will be straightforward. So I can maybe start with a simple and straightforward attempt, and then everybody can start saying, okay, well, I'd like to add to that in this way, and this is why. And again, you know, David, I'm pretty sure is familiar with my thinking, and he's tried and tested some of my techniques along the way, and some have worked. You know, some people collect exotic butterflies. I collect exotic corporate forms, you know, and David's been out there sort of, we worked together for a long time on and off. So maybe David would like to jump in at this point since I've been talking about him.
I wouldn't mind talking about butterflies. So, so we talked about the Drosophila, that's my dark side, right? You know, social insect, right? But butterflies is my positive side. Actually, it was a term that Chris came up with. So the idea of a very simple, quite standard, uninspiring starting structure. I call it minimal viable governance. The core additional aspect into that is it's designed to evolve and shape, just like I'm trying to find the name here. I'm going to call her Jill, but it was Till or something like that. I was talking about, you know, very convivial, very natural, a non-conflicting group of people, but it still has structure, just common sense, old, simple legal structure, but it can evolve, and it has certain properties which immunize it against future risk, like the non-dominion one that Chris was talking about, against corporate takeover, against this, that, and the other, right? So, but basically, it's just kind of simple, wrapped common sense. The things I got against it a little bit is that it's a little bit boring language and, what have you. So trying to humanize that as much as possible. But in practice, it's very human. But the language is one of, starting with a caterpillar. Well, I added to the butterfly thing. So if you're trying to create this amazing change the world, large-scale project, we could call it, rather than a unicorn, we can call it a butterfly. It's just got all our dreams, our hopes, and our aspirations on it, and it's kind of like simple, perfect, beautiful, flying, soaring creature. We've got to start where we are, and we're starting with a tiny little egg, and it's got to kind of go through a number of stages of mutation and transformation of its structure, that at each stage as it grows and more people come involved, or more value gets involved, more potential conflict gets involved, it needs to adapt and it needs to mutate. And we need to anticipate that change, that evolution from a simple beginning, the egg, to the butterfly, because if we don't anticipate it, we will fall foul of the traditional problem of organizations, starting with a really good ethos, a really good group of people, really good conviviality, and then within 7 years it becomes just like any other corporate form that's been there for the last 50 years. So we have to appreciate the evolving, changing requirements that structure will go through in future. And we've got to be very conscious of the classic attacks, misunderstandings and issues that happen and have happened to people for the last 10,000 years, if we're going to hope to have any form of governance that works at any form of scale or power that is different from the traditional forms that we recognize in history. Yep. So egg, caterpillar, butterfly, that's the other aspect of the language.
Could I just come back on that, and then complete the circle, really? Yeah? Hello? Yeah, can you hear me, guys?
Yes. If you put your phone, by the way, on, I think you swipe, you can see everyone's face, and people are putting their thumbs up and stuff.
All right, cool. All right, yeah. Just to say that, that analogy of going through, from concept, which is the egg stage, a few people think of a concept, via the caterpillar, which is a more formal and maybe protected in terms of, because once you reach a certain stage of a group of individuals, you get exposed, and the people you deal with are not prepared to deal with individuals. So that's why you might find the need to form a more protective sort of entity, and then on via the chrysalis, which is, I use things like a bit in the States an LLC, but here it would be an LLP, as a short-term special purpose vehicle to get from the caterpillar to the butterfly. And of course, different eggs will give rise to different beautiful butterflies. And that's in the sort of the design. But the key point, the most important rule or provision in any agreement is the ability to change it, right? And that's what fucks everything up all the time, because with the conventional means of equity and debt, typically, you will always find somebody at some stage of development whose interests are compromised by the next stage. Some people don't want diluting the interest of, you always get that. So the art is in evolving the legal forms with the progress of the concept between, from the egg through the caterpillar and the chrysalis to the butterfly. And that's something I've worked out, I reckon, and David and I have, been backwards and forwards on this for years. So he's familiar with my thinking, but it's such a good metaphor. You can come up with a similar one with a tree, with the seed, the sapling, et cetera, et cetera. It's an organic approach. And I think it's achievable without going anywhere near amending statutes or things like that. It's a complementary mechanism. It's consensual. You opt in. and those who are in do it. Okay, that's me. That's me done.
I love that metaphor. It's
Chris,
interesting.
I'm sorry. Phalan, you go.
No. Go ahead. No, I was saying that I love that metaphor because. Hello.
Go ahead.
Oh, okay. No, okay. I didn't know you guys could hear me. No, I said I love the metaphor because that tension, that motivational tension, that friction that the butterfly has to go through in order to get all of the excess mucus or whatever that stuff is on the wings to come out, and for it to be able to fly is necessary part of the process. Because if you actually make it easy, then when the butterfly actually comes out, the wings are all mushy and soaked with. You can't rush it. You have to organically let it take its course.
Yep.
Another aspect of the story is that one thing that often stops well-intentioned groups of people when they meet of adopting, frankly, any form of rule. I mean, they avoid them like the plague, right? And therefore they just suffer with bullying and the tyranny of structuralists classically repeating on and on and on. Not initially, but after 3-4 years they do. One thing that people are very wary of those rules is because precisely what Chris is saying is once they're set, they feel they're going to be rigid, set in stone, and they're going to be trapped in it, right? Now, when you say, hang on, we're not like that, we're going through these stages and we're deliberately programming this kind of metamorphosis from this stage to another, and we're all going to debate it, and over an extended period of time, we're going to discuss it, and then we're going to adopt the principles for the next stage. It liberates a lot of fear in the group for talking about rules, talking about structure. They get creative about those rules and structure. They have the conversation instead of just all saying nice things in a group. And as soon as someone says, oh, how about this voting procedure or this, everyone goes and runs away and nothing ever gets decided. And someone else comes up with another one. And then everyone gets bored of the philosophers talking abstractly about whatever it is. And the democracy people come along and say, bugger all that, let's just do something, right? And it all goes in that sort of pattern. Instead, we need long, thoughtful, playful discussions about the sort of rules we do want, and then mutate into that next stage where it might last 6 months, might last a couple of years, or might last to a stage of growth that we agree in. And then we can see the growth that is never perfect at any stage, but we're moving towards something that we all believe in.
Joshua.
Colin, go ahead.
I was just wondering, thanks Josh, if we could take into account, sort of do an audit of what stage different projects are in, that because people aren't all starting from scratch and what they have to offer. We might not know exactly how to value like a new person coming on. For example, I know David's working on some things, and I've been considering what he may be looking for agreements if I was interested in that kind of a thing. So we could discuss that, but it seems like we're in that kind of an area where, you know, Joshua and I have discussed doing some video stuff, and I got some minor stuff I'm doing. So, you know, I have to weigh those things out, what those agreements are, and even if it's volunteer or not, you know, those are agreements that need to be honored, and how much time do you have? So I find managing within a group of such diversity, you could, you know, as a software developer or whatever I'm doing, I could, you know, be involved in several things. So how practically do we want to audit ourselves? Like, can we do an audit? Like, what would be the quickest way to, like, I'm trying to do a profile, but that's more of a coffee shop version. That's not a database version. Like a spreadsheet would probably be what we need. I don't know, has Lauren already done some of that work? I know she's involved with, I think Johnny and the John Kelvin community with the some projects. I don't know exactly what that's all about. So there's so many different little things going on. We're not starting from scratch, and how do we value that and ask people to clearly state what it is they could do to contribute, or, you know, instead of getting into a philosophical speech, you could actually talk about, you know, the different actual tools you're using. I think that's kind of the, you know, so that's a technical discussion, and then there's the governance discussion that you wrap around that as it progresses. Well, would you be interested in, you know, I just got some funding, would you be interested in doing this or that? And then it starts to get more serious. So how can people feel safer as we grow this space to actually have these micro contracts and payoffs? And I know, I don't want to talk too long, I know there's a lot of people thinking about this at many different levels, and I'm right now just trying to be a duocracy individual where I'm going to use duct tape, crayons, whatever I need to get there. But I'm starting to meet the people, and I'm finding that it's not really clear how one would contribute, or how to engage that process without, you know, how much time should you wait before you do the date or whatever. Thanks.
I just wanted to say, I know Chris wasn't here when I was talking about mentor and mentee and a way of working together in our club. But I want to bring up a metaphor of oxygen and ozone. Two ozone layers. And a mentor and a mentee is atoms of oxygen. I hear someone's phone ringing. I don't know who that is. Maybe it's Lauren. It's okay. So two oxygens eventually attract a hydrogen molecule, and it forms a little droplet of water. And that's much like your butterfly analogy with the chrysalis. But as that water forms and becomes a tablespoon and becomes a bucket and becomes a giant, huge well, that forming of those droplets eventually needs to be governed and needs a container. But until there's actual water to work with, there's just ozone in the cloud. And if we're all chit-chatting about what that cloud could bring when it rains, until it actually rains, there's really nothing to talk about, in my opinion. We can talk about what will happen when it rains, and we can collect the rainwater and get ready for it. But if the cloud passes over and never rains, then we're just here in the desert. So I just want to bring up that metaphor of two. It's an old saying from a Taoist philosophy: the one created the two created the three created the myriad of all things. And I think starting with just having one person having a breadth of knowledge and wanting to altruistically, because of the good of that person, share that with someone else, that mentor-menteeship brings so much value. How to quantify that value, I'm not going to say, because I don't know. But I'm sure that when the hydrogen molecule comes through and realizes that it forms water, an actual element that can be frozen solid and broken, that can be pushed into a container of an LLP, a non-dominium club, you name it. It can be channeled through any kind of funnel, but until it forms water, I don't think there's anything to talk about. It's just ozone in the cloud. And I just want to bring up that metaphor because it's two pieces of oxygen forming one. So just starting with the basic building blocks of life and letting that life flow. And with that, I'm complete.
That's very interesting, quite philosophical too. Like you're saying, if there's no funding, how do we invest? But I'm saying, you know, I think we're expected to build like a prototype and maybe have a second job while we do that if there's no investing. Like, I don't know. If you make an agreement with somebody, you might not actually have funding right off the bat. I don't know if that's a bad analogy, but it seems that I'm investing in myself, learning. So that's an investment I'm putting into myself, but I'm not getting any money. But if I have to get a second job because I haven't met up with somebody who does have funding yet, then I guess it's a partial failure. But yeah, how long do you measure that investment, and what are the mentoring ways to go through that? I think having the diversity in the group here, you know, I hear some people do have funding, some people do have some very interesting projects. You know, some of them are huge, some of them are smaller. So, you know, anyway, I just put that out there. Same thing again, like, how do we practically audit what opportunities are there? So, and I don't expect everybody's going to be working with everybody as well. So, you know, we're going to have sort of a sociocracy going on. I'm not sure what models. The butterfly sounds good to me too. But I am taking down the notes about that cyclical thing, and I would like to know the protection layers to going from the egg to the caterpillar to the butterfly is an LLC short term, and then once you're at the butterfly stage, you're fairly stable. Is that the idea?
Well, could I? Sorry.
Yes.
Where are we? Yeah, I love the analogy of water. I mean, water is an energy vector, probably the most common one everywhere, you know, but it has different states. You know, you got ice, you got water, you got steam. And for me, the interesting thing is what happens in the phase transition from between these states. And, you know, like the ice is there for a long time and it's solid in a particular state with certain properties. Water then has different properties and steam has yet more, depending on how much energy is sort of within it. And I think there's a very interesting metaphor to be used there, you know. If you think of, if you like, money as I do, as a sort of almost like a form of energy, it gets very, very interesting as a metaphor. And I think at the minute, what we're seeing on a big scale is a transition. We're going through turbulence. Trump and Brexit and all the rest of this shit, it's all turbulence that you get going through a phase change. And the phase change, in my view, is going from a commodity economy, this is what I call market 2, which is a mediated economy, to a services economy. And the services economy is basically smart. We're going from, you know, resource intensive, capital intensive to smart intensive, if you like. And for me, that's why I'm an optimist, that you can keep people out of land and you can keep people out of resources, but you can't keep them out of knowledge, right? And that's why I'm a huge optimist for the future, that we can actually mobilize knowledge and you know, knowledge, know-how, know-who are the 3 things I talk about. And if we can mobilize those using different protocols, which I believe is what we're doing, then you're back to this, you know, mobilization of the entire political economy in a completely different way. And I think we're engaged in that right now, actually. We're part of it.
I have a suggestion. Would it make sense to maybe think of a couple of ideas that we could actually bring forward as possible capital ventures that the group would take on that could fund the future endeavors that we might all attempt?
Yeah.
And Phalan, could I also ask, what are the needs of our individuals here as a service that we have not yet either found or we can't afford, but a service that we need? What are some of the needs that individuals have that maybe we could create as a club to provide value to each other and give service to each other?
I love that.
I just wanted to put.
I love that.
Love that.
So may I say something here? I mean, I'm completely new here, but before people start to get together, they need to build trust. But what are the effects of, how do we build trust?
Yeah, you know, it's funny because it comes back down to values again. And we've been having these conversations for the past couple of sessions that we engaged in. And I think that we all have to really throw in what our values are and understand that by virtue of us just being here and wanting to do something from an altruistic standpoint, at least for me, it pulls me into a sense that I want to work with these people. You know, I don't know what I'm working on yet, but the fact that you guys are here in this room sharing space, it tells me that whatever it is that I have that I could contribute, you know, to this somewhat zeitgeist energy that's driving us, I feel like I want to do it, you know? I mean, as long as you guys don't like have me like, you know, drink Kool-Aid or something, you know? I think I'm good.
No, I'm asking the question because on Monday and Tuesday, that was I'm going to face with these teenagers. Teenagers have a lot of problem to trust one another and to trust the world around them. And I built up a little model to try to get them trusting one another. I don't know if it's the right one, but I'm going to attempt that. I really loved what Joshua talked about, this notion of the going from one-to-one to one-to-many. What I'm facing clearly in not understanding it, that how do you define the governance, like we said, and how do we take decision, and how do we move from 1 to 2 to 2 to 3 to 3 to 4? I mean, yeah, the trust. I mean, I've been working a lot on trust for 15 years since I became a stay-at-home dad. I did it with my Breton network. I like the fact that Chris is from Scotland, then you will understand how the Celts are trusting each other. And
some of them.
There is the Vikings on the side, and there is a Francophile world, and there is the Anglophile world, and there is minority language world. And how do we go from local to global? And the trust is like the value. Yeah, the trust is how do we do that? I mean, but what I love about doing it offline now and in my community, that we all interconnected. And when you know your local networks, you know that out of 30,000 people, there is like 300 people that are out of the frameworks of the 30,000. And these people are the trust agents of making sure that the communities stick together and happy to pay the taxes together and share this services together. Well, I'm interested about finding the 300 people. And that's my new quest here in Princeton. Anyway, thank you for listening. I have my project anyway that I can talk with. I'm pressing the red button on Monday with 25 kids at Princeton University. That's it.
Good luck.
Thank you.
Ollie, I was going to say, if I could help teach the kids or get the kids trusting, please reach out to me and I'll make sure that we're in the same thread.
All right.
So.
Ollie,
okay, Joshua.
Ollie, there was a proposal from Phalan that people say, here's a project that we could all kind of work on. And why don't you just before just disappearing or what have you, just say, if on Monday, this project and how it's going forwards, what sort of help or input or advice or the people here could sort of do to get involved and strengthen what you're picturing?
Yeah, if you're passionate about this notion of diversity, for me, I discovered that there is 7,111 languages. This mapping of the language to where they are in the world, the zip code behind the language is for me very important. That's the first thing. The second thing is, if you know how to scratch 3,000 nonprofit in New Jersey and find a way to organize them to follow the 17 goal of the UN and know which goal they are trying to pursue, the 3,000 nonprofit. That's the second thing. The third thing is, I believe that the pillar of this monitoring and Joshua, what did you use? Monitoring and mindy and monitoring?
Mentoring. So
mentoring.
the person teaching has to really know what they're teaching in order to teach it. And by laying that out, they're learning it better at a deeper level. And the person asking the questions and learning is teaching the teacher by allowing them to teach each other. So the knowledge is, I don't like the word value, but the knowledge is deepening and solidifying. I love the water analogy. It's turning into more water droplets.
Yeah.
And through that exchange, that is the creation. Without any sort of deepening of knowledge and looking deeper into what it is that you're doing, it stays surface deep. And I think any subject, any type of ontology can deepen with that type of a relationship. And I think that is where the aha moments come from. And that's where the real value comes from, is that exchange and that energy exchange between people. I think you're muted, Ollie.
Yeah.
When I stopped working as a civil and coastal engineer in Africa and Asia and Latin America, I discovered that because I was putting my being as of service to my wife, of service to my kids, of service to my family, of service of my extended family, who was the Bretons living outside of Brittany, who wanted to connect with inside of Brittany, of building this non-profit in New York City to unite all the people from Brittany, my extended family, because we are four. You know, I discovered that now the people who were the most willing to give was the people who had the most time to give without and being paid by heart as much, and not really thinking of being paid by money, were the people over 50 and the people under 25 or 30 or 35, depending when they find their girlfriend, basically, and want to start their, or boyfriend when they want to start their own family. So I want to do that between Trenton and Princeton. Trenton is very street smart and know how to connect the ends and the brain. And in Princeton, it's academic smart, which is they know a lot how to connect with their brain, with the other brain. And so I want to connect these two parts, Trenton, Princeton, and after that it will be Philly, New York, and hopefully DC, Boston. Kind of, that's my trail of thought. We're going to start very local in Princeton and Trenton. So I am going to have deadline in front of me.
Hey, Ollie?
I think, yes.
We only have like 8 minutes left.
I'm sorry, Lauren. I'm hijacking.
I'm sorry.
So that yeah,
this is important for me because I want to make some decisions about governance, and I don't want to interrupt you, but.
No, that's fine.
Can I just say something at the end of that, Ollie? I don't know what you're doing, but I would certainly like to feed back on what you're saying on those three things with very concrete, pragmatic stuff that people we know are working on. So maybe after this meeting, then, if you want to still be on, we could chat more about it.
Okay, perfect. Yeah, I would love that, but I don't.
I've got a Zoom account, so I can open up a Zoom session here, and I'd like to definitely give you some feedback on that and see if it helps. All right.
I'd actually like to. We have 7 minutes left, and we can go on after. But in this 7 minutes, I just want to kind of see: are there things, actionable things that we can take out of it? Are there decisions that we've made? Can you take 2 weeks and come up with an agreement for us? Do you agree to do that?
Yeah, it won't take 2 weeks though, because it'll be a very simple agreement. But it'll be a start.
Well, I think, Chris, I think you have our trust to do that. Am I wrong here?
No, it's all right. It's going to cost you though, you know.
We'll pay it.
I'm joking. We're talking about a beer. We're talking about a beer here or something, you know, guys. Don't worry about that.
Okay, so if Chris can come up with an initial agreement for us, and we can use Inspiral's handbook to change. They have a process to change rules and to suggest things. So, I mean, I think that gives us enough of a working model. I don't think we need to spend weeks and weeks on that, because I think things will come up. I think that the sooner we can put in some money, like you were talking about, the pizza money, Joshua, the more we can see value flows and not talk about these things in the theoretical, because I think that's just, it means nothing. We can talk about values, but I think it's much better if we just put in, you know, something small to begin with, like, you know, and instead of talking about 1,000 people putting in $1,000, we can just do 10 people with $100 or something like that, and just get it done and do something with it.
Yeah, and could I say we might just go for, it's David's analogy here. Okay, you know, let's pick a Drosophila, which is like people based, and maybe also identify something in the real world, but at a very early stage as well. You know, just take a couple of eggs, find a couple of eggs, maybe 3 eggs, and see if we can hatch those eggs.
Yeah, to make that concrete, that's what I proposed last session as well, was like, you know, to get a bunch of cats together, get them to build something with a concrete target that they have to build, otherwise the rain comes in, and they'll all start working together. So something within the 9 months target, that's why I want to talk concretely with you, Ollie, about, and whoever else wants to go in, just having these general, if it's like people coming together, consensual decision making, lots of little groups budding off, it's a social, and I'm up for being a social, but I'm not putting my energy a lot into that. If we can define a concrete project where we put in 100 quid, we all commit to working and building towards that, and we start from that kind of energy, I'm really happy to sacrifice my time, energy, and creativity to that kind of collective endeavor rather than just a social.
Yeah.
Be careful, guys, because I'm very good at raising money.
Yeah, money's easy to get. Yeah,
because I can put a big. We can select people very quickly with raising money.
I just want to say before I go that the value is in each other. And the trust comes from the stuff we provide to each other. Let's just keep things into the reality. Is if you give service to someone out of the goodness of your heart, they'll trust you. And if they don't return that, you will not trust them. So
that's the point.
It just works that simply, is you just give with asking nothing in it back. And if they give to you again, there's trust. That is trust. Yeah. And the value is not how much money we raise. The value is in each other of, do we want to give, like, do I like Phalan? Do I want to give to Phalan? Heck yeah, I love Phalan. I want to give to him. And I love all, you know, if we don't have that, then we don't have anything. So I just want to remind, it is people-centric. It's not, you know, who can, and if someone just values money, they'll weed themselves out if it's not for the good of. Thank you, guys.
You can't buy trust, but you can build it.
Yeah, I trust. Support him, so I'm going to go to his meeting right now. So I'm just letting you guys know. Thank you so much. Thank you, Lauren, and let me know if you need some money to give next week. I would like to do that.
Me too.
Me too.
Ollie, I've posted in the chat. I don't know if you can get the chat. Is Ollie gone? No.
No, I'm here. Wait a minute.
In the chat is the Zoom link. If Lauren's going to close this meeting so that we can talk concretely about the project you were talking about.
Okay, wait, let me go back to the Zoom.
Okay, guys,
I can send it to you, Ollie.
I got to drive.
Hey, Colin.
All right, careful, Chris. You know your reflexes are fading.
Chris, do you need anything from us or me? Or
if I do, I'll contact you offline. Yeah.
Okay.
Bye, guys.
Are you off, Phalan?
Yeah,
thank you, Lauren. Thank you so much.
I'm taking a UX course, and look at me with my British accent. I'm taking a UX course, and I have to go and do some interviews.
Okay, cool.
All right.
All right. I mean, I don't know, Lauren. You're in charge of the timing. What's going on now?
I think that you and Ollie are going to go off to your meeting room.
Okay.
I'm gonna go to Sam's.
Okay.
I think, Colin, you're going to go to Sam's?
I'm going to tag with Ollie because we're already working this project together. I brought him into this mess, so I'm going to protect him from David.
You know, Ollie,
no, not at all.
Ollie, I didn't mean to interrupt you, Ollie. I would love to talk with you. I was just trying to get something done so we can.
No, I'm thrilled. I'm thrilled that he's going to, that I brought him in because this is what
Lauren, there is no problem. I want to know more about your work that you did with Harvard because we need to figure out a way to connect the Princeton and Harvard on that.
Absolument. Et que je suis française aussi.
Oh là là, et de quelle région alors?
Mon mari, il est français. Oui.
Oh là là, et il est d'où alors?
Il habite à Paris. En fait, il est africain, mais Oui,
Il est où d'Afrique? Il est d'où?
du Niger.
Il y a combien de langues au Niger?
Oh, 3, 4, 10, je sais pas. Il y a beaucoup.
That's at the core of my quest, Lauren. It's at the core of my quest.
That's also what I want to talk about, because the area that Lauren's husband is from is also a community in Nigeria that I've been working with.
Wow.
And the multilingual stuff I want to talk about, and the SDGs. Wow. So it's very relevant. That's why I said before you.
Perfect. Great. See you. Let's try to figure out where I need to go next. And I don't find the link, and it's driving me crazy.
It's in the chat.
But I'm like completely not aligned with.
Here, let me hit it again. It's in our chat, Olive.
Yeah, right at the end.
You see the link? I think he's gone. Yeah, he's gone.
He's gone. Okay, well, let's pray that this coming together. Alexa, who the hell are you, mate?
Good question. Yeah, I just woke up. I'm trying to find out who the hell I am. I think I've been coming to this group. I figured that you're saying bye. I'm somewhere in the middle of nowhere in Australia, and I'm on the road, just pulled over and fell asleep because I joined and no one was here, and I fell asleep. I just woke up now and I joined again.
Yeah, I can see it. It's dark there. Yeah. Well, be careful of those poisonous spiders your way, mate.
All right. Yeah, cool. But just something interesting. I'm actually in one of the darkest places on the map for seeing stars and everything. So I can literally see the whole Milky Way, literally the way it is. Right. Well, not now. This light is blocking me. But yeah, it's beautiful.
Cool.
I wish I could share this joy with you. I can't.
Yeah, it doesn't work yet. In any case, I better run off to, otherwise I guess Ollie's going to be in this other space without anyone there. So I'm going to run now, and thanks for convening this, Lauren. Speak to you soon, I hope, because we need structure. Okay, see you, Alexa.
No problem, man. See you later.
Yeah, give my regards to the spiders, the frogs, and the Australians.
Will do.
Yeah, I'm going to. Nice to see you again.
Yeah, no problem, man. Yeah, see you later.
Okay, bye. Good luck.
Bye. Thanks.
And you might check to see the ISS space station flying over. I saw it Friday fly over, so you might want to have a look for that. It's always a good hobby. Yeah, just look it up online. Look for the tracker. See ya.
Okay, sure. ISS. Okay. Bye.
Yeah, I think I saw it going near Australia too. See ya.
Cool. All right, Lauren. If you're going to, that would be fine with me. Yeah. You're mute. Yeah, but I can see you saying something.
I said I've been wanting to just talk to you, so this is perfect.
Oh yeah. Okay, cool.
Yeah, I was just getting rid of other people because I didn't want to talk to them. I wanted to talk to you.
It's on the course.
I'm just kidding. Yeah. But I did want to talk to you.